I haven't actually used this helmet yet. It's the wrong one. The one in the game tonight was navy blue with a orange S, but I haven't actually gotten to use this helmet yet. So I think the best place to put it is right there. Hey lifers, Dustin here, and on Friday the 13th, the dreaded Friday the 13th, Syracuse football decided that they would go big game hunting, and they went out and poached the number 2 defending national champion Clemson Tigers. This game had to be especially sweet for Syracuse quarterback Eric Dungey, who was actually knocked out during the first quarter of last year's game in Clemson and did not return for the rest of the year. He missed the rest of the 2016 season. Clemson won that game 54-0, by the way. Dungey more than made up for it, however. He went 20 of 32 for 278 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and he tacked on 61 rushing yards, including a 45-yarder that was this close, a shoestring tackle away from taking it all the way to the house. A lot of those throws were on 3rd and long, where it would be like 3rd and 11, and they would get 12 yards, and a lot of those runs would be where he would escape the pocket and get just enough. This was the Orange's 3rd victory over defending national champions, including 1987 against Penn State and 1998 against Michigan. This was only the Orange's 2nd win ever over the Clemson Tigers. It was their first as an ACC member, meaning since 2013. Their only other victory was in the 1996 Gator Bowl, when my boy Donovan McNabb beat Clemson 41-0 in the 1996 Gator Bowl, which, little fun fact about me, is one of probably the first Clemson bowl game I ever remember. One of my first bowl memories ever. Syracuse's upset snapped a 12-game Clemson road win streak, which was the longest in school history. It also snapped a 12-game conference road game win streak. Their last road game loss in the ACC came in 2014 against Georgia Tech when Deshaun Watson got injured in the first quarter, and it snapped an 11-game overall winning streak, which coming into the game was the longest in the nation after Oklahoma lost last week. Clemson had not lost since winning the national championship. The game was really neck and neck as far as score goes the entire game, but Syracuse never trailed in this one, and don't let the score fool you. Don't let the back and forth scores fool you. This was Syracuse game from beginning to end, from the first drive until the last. It felt like they could pretty much do anything they wanted on offense, and it showed. They were 8 of 19 on 3rd downs, while Clemson was just 2 of 11. This is, without a doubt, the biggest win in the Dino Babers era. Last year, they beat then number 17 Virginia Tech on this exact same weekend, nonetheless, on October 15th. But this one is way bigger. This is only Syracuse's 2nd ever win against a top 2 opponent. They had actually never beaten a number 2. They beat number 1 Nebraska a couple of decades ago. And next week, they have a really tough game against Miami. Now they need NC State to lose 2 conference games. With a Clemson team that's still on the schedule, it is still a really tough game, as well as a couple of others down the road. It is still a possibility. If NC State can lose 2 more games and Syracuse can beat Miami, the Orange will control their destiny in the ACC Atlantic. Crazier things have happened. Now let's talk about Clemson. So, in my opinion, this loss is 100% on the coaching staff. Now, I don't like to really call out coaches after games. The heat of the moment, in the middle of the game, you're just trying to keep your head above water, no matter which team you are in most games. But it was pretty clear pretty early on that Kelly Bryant was not 100%, that he was hurting the team. In the second quarter, it became glaring that he was actually a liability to this offense. And yes, he left right before halftime because of a concussion, but it should have never gotten to that. The reason he got that concussion, the reason he got hit so many times, the reason his ankle kept getting re-aggravated is because he couldn't move, because his ankle hurt. And when you have an offense that is so built on a quarterback running, look at what Syracuse was able to do tonight versus what Clemson was able to do. When your quarterback running the ball is a cornerstone of your offense and he can't do it, bad things are going to happen. Maybe not the concussion play in and of itself, but a lot of the plays leading up to that showed that Kelly Bryant could have gotten away from a lot of those tackles. Maybe had made, some shiftiness in the pocket, scrambled around, or bought some time for some plays to develop down the field. He also overthrew on a lot of passes, specifically if he had to throw across his body, and his feet never really got settled, and that's because his ankle hurt, and it probably hurt to settle. He should have never played in this game, and Syracuse's defense knew that. When they saw him hurt, like sharks with blood in the water, they just pinned their ears. Sharks don't have ears, but they pinned their ears back, and they went after Kelly Bryant, and they blitzed on a lot of these plays. Clemson also got away from the running game in the first half. I don't know why. They just didn't seem to get the efficiency out of it they wanted. And in that second quarter, with an injured quarterback, it felt like they abandoned the run. I'm not really sure why. Maybe they didn't really want him to take the steps to hand it to the running backs. I'm not really sure. I know Travis Etienne got tweaked hamstring, I believe. I think it was in the third quarter. And Feaster was getting gobbled up in a lot of those plays, but they tried to do some things with some screens with Hunter Renfrow and Deion Kane. It just didn't work. The screen plays don't work very often for this Clemson offense. Another thing that I think a lot of Clemson fans are going to be asking themselves during this upcoming bye week is, why Zerrick Cooper? Look, I'm not a coach. I'm not in the practices. I don't know these players. I don't know how much of the playbook they're familiar with or they're comfortable with. But based on what I saw in Memorial Stadium last week against Wake Forest, I saw Zerrick Cooper throw one of the worst passes I've seen all season, and I saw Hunter Johnson go 5 for 5 on a drive for a touchdown. And that was enough for me to go, well, obviously Hunter Johnson, a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, which doesn't mean everything, I understand, but it certainly means the talent is there. Obviously, if anything happens with Kelly Bryant, Hunter Johnson is going to start, he's going to play, whatever. And we never even saw him. The Clemson coaches didn't even put Hunter Johnson in for a drive or two to kind of see what, maybe he could give a spark, maybe he could change some directions, maybe he could get some of those short slants or something going for the offense. Syracuse's offense ate up a lot of time. I think one of their drives was 8 minutes or something like that. So I understand there were limited possessions for that, but even towards the end, they just never gave Hunter Johnson quite the chance that I and probably a lot of other Clemson fans kind of wonder if maybe they should have. Maybe almost as much as Bryant's injury, this team was really hurt by the injury to Greg Hugel. After a freak incident which he tore his ACL a couple of weeks ago, Alex Spence has stepped in and not very well. He's 2 for 6 on the season after taking over, and he was 1 of 3 in this game. He missed 2 field goals in a game where the Tigers lost by 1. That is simply not going to cut it at the level that the Clemson Tigers are trying to play at. He has got to figure out a way, if it's in his head, to get out of it, to snap out of it, and if there's some kind of footwork or connection with Sweeney, the snapper, not the coach, his son, or whatever they have to do, he has got to figure out a way to correct that if Clemson is going to play in a playoff or a New Year's Six Bowl, because when you're playing a team like Penn State, and you miss 2 out of 3 field goals, you're going to lose the game like you did tonight. They have to fix that because Greg Hugel ain't coming back anytime soon. The biggest thing that I took away from this game was how easily that Syracuse offense, particularly in the run game, just gutted the Clemson front seven. I came into this week thinking that the Clemson front seven was the best by far in the country, in the nation. They were the best front seven. And by the end of the game, if Syracuse had had a 3rd and 5 and had told me somehow through a text message that they were going to run the ball up the middle, I would have bet on Syracuse getting 6 yards in the first down. There were a lot of plays where they lost contain on the quarterback. They didn't make the proper tackle. They tried to do some of this hit tackle and stuff. It doesn't work. At this level, you have to wrap up. And I was really impressed by the Syracuse offensive line and the push that they would get at the initial contact. There were also a lot of plays where the running back from Syracuse, no matter who it was, 2 or 3 different guys, would kind of squirt through for an extra 3 yards right at the end of the play, and that would change some of these plays from a 3rd and 6 to a 3rd and 3 and make it way easier to get and convert and keep the drive going. It would be really easy to actually blame that all on the defense getting really winded from Syracuse up-tempo offense, and I'm probably wrong. I have no doubt these guys were tired at the end of the game, but they didn't look that tired to me. And what I mean by that is I didn't really see them hunched over, hands on hips, taking a knee. Now, part of that could be Syracuse didn't give them time. That's a fair argument. But they didn't really seem that out of condition. They seemed pretty well conditioned for that game. And it just seemed like Syracuse just pushed them around. Syracuse did kind of whatever they wanted to. And it started from the first drive where they drove right down the field and scored up until the last drive where Clemson just simply could not get a stop. Now, obviously, there were plenty of big plays and good plays by this defense. Obviously, Tanner Muse scoop and run for over 60 yards for a touchdown on a fumble recovery really, in the end, is what even kept Clemson in this game. And Clelin Ferrell was in the backfield the whole game. He had 3.5 sacks, 5.5 tackles for loss. He was a monster the whole time. But the front seven's inability to really get stops when it mattered most, and not just the front seven, the secondary too. There were plenty of 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 11s where they got 8 or 12 plays, just enough to get there. There were guys running wide open down the sidelines on wheel routes. You simply cannot have that happen at this level. And if Clemson wants to be an elite team, the elite team we all kind of started to think that they were. I even put a video out a couple weeks ago asking if Alabama versus Clemson is an inevitability at this point and showed the winning percentage for all these games. Obviously, that was the kiss of death. I apologize, Clemson. I shouldn't have said that. It's my fault. You can blame me if you want. In fact, I also did a video on Washington State's top 5 wins, and they're currently getting blown out by Cal. So again, my channel might be the kiss of death. But if you want to play in an elite level and get back, winning all of your games is hard. Winning as a national champion or defending national champion on the road against a hungry team is hard. But these are the games that if you want a championship that you have to win, and the defense did not produce when it needed to, the offense did not produce when they needed to, whether it be a coaching change or not. If you are a backup quarterback at Clemson who just won a national championship, you should be ready to go. If you are the backup kicker at Clemson, you should be ready to go. These are not excuses. But I still don't think this loss was as bad as, at least optics-wise, as what Oklahoma's loss to Iowa State is. And Clemson, if you get to the playoff, or you're number 5 and 6 right there in late November, you can use we had a backup quarterback, we had a backup kicker, we were on the road. Those kind of excuses against a Syracuse team that may only end up 7-5, 8-4, depending on how the rest of the year goes. They already had 3 losses. It doesn't look great, but it's certainly not over. In 2014, Pittsburgh and Syracuse both joined the ACC, and now in consecutive years, Clemson has lost to both of them as unranked teams, while Clemson was in the top 5. You can't win them all, but those are 2 you probably should have won. And while we're talking about the playoff, it is interesting to note that they lost to Pittsburgh, I believe, around Veterans Day, November 12th, I think it was, somewhere around there. And they still got into the playoff, obviously, as the number 2 ranked team. So they lost this weekend. Do you know where they were a year ago this weekend? On October 15th, the same day that Syracuse beat number 17 Virginia Tech, coincidentally, Clemson survived against NC State at home in overtime in a game that they were really outclassed and should have lost. So if you want to use, every year is different and all that stuff. But if you want to compare, you lost in mid-November last year and still made it. Now it's mid-October. There's plenty of football left. Couple of last little thoughts here. Maybe it was because it was a Friday night game. Maybe it was because it started at 7 p.m. It started earlier than my high school game started. But for some reason during this game, I got Mountain West vibes. Was that the only one that felt like we were watching like Wyoming versus Colorado State at times? I can't explain it any further than that. It's just something I was feeling when I was watching the game. Part of it probably was how awful the audio was from ESPN. Obviously, Mac Brown, who is awful at announcing, I hate listening to his games. But obviously, those announcers were not in the Carrier Dome, and it showed. The audio from the crowd sounded really quiet for a lot of the game. I know they weren't. They're in the Carrier Dome. They're beating the number 2 team. I know they were not quiet. The referee's mic was awful. I'm chalking that up to it being awful I looked at my TV. I'm chalking it up to being awful in the actual stadium. The announcing was awful, as always, but they sounded awful, too. They always sounded like they were speaking through a tin can. And it really kind of screwed up the whole experience for me as a fan. ESPN, you got to do better. If these guys were in the studio in Bristol, Connecticut, calling this game, they couldn't drive the 4 hours up to Syracuse to be in person and call this game. Come on. That's ridiculous. Another thing, even though Syracuse outperformed and outclassed Clemson during this game, it was really sloppy, really, by both teams. It felt sloppier by Clemson early on, and then Syracuse kind of picked up the slack. By the end of the game, both teams had at least 11 penalties and at least 100 penalty yards. That's something both teams are going to have to clean up as they move forward. So there you have it. Syracuse, 3-3 Syracuse, a Syracuse team that lost at home to Middle Tennessee State, that had to make a comeback and barely lost to NC State. They beat the defending national champion, number 2 Clemson Tigers. Let me know your thoughts on the game down below and your outlook for either or both of these teams and the ACC going forward the rest of the way. Do you think Clemson's eliminated, or do they still have another shot to get into the college football playoff at the end of the year? Let me know that down below. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click on the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Eric Dungey, who was actually knocked out during the first quarter of last year's game in Clemson and did not return for the rest of the year. He missed the rest of the 2016 season. Clemson won that game 54-0, by the way. Dungey more than made up for it, however. He went 20 of 32 for 278 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and he tacked on... Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and on Friday the 13th, the dreaded Friday the 13th, Syracuse football decided that they would go big game hunting, and they went out and poached the number 2 defending national champion Clemson Tigers. This game had to be especially sweet for Syracuse quarterback Eric. 61 rushing yards, including a 45-yarder that was this close, a shoestring tackle away from taking it all the way to the house. A lot of those throws were on 3rd and long, where it would be like 3rd and 11, and they would get 12 yards. And a lot of those runs would be where he would escape the pocket and get just enough. This was the Orange's 3rd victory over defending national champions, including 1987 against Penn State and 1998 against Michigan. This was only the Orange's 2nd win ever over the Clemson Tigers. It was their first as an ACC member, meaning since 2013. Their only other victory was in the 1996 Gator Bowl, when I haven't actually used this helmet yet. It's the wrong one. The one in the game tonight was navy blue with a orange S, but I haven't actually gotten to use this helmet yet. So I think the best place to put it is right there.